Never in my wildest dreams did I imagine that Xiaomi would do this. Here's another 17 Pro Max, and this one's not made by Apple. Yes, as we are all aware, there is no Xiaomi 16 series this year, which was what everybody was expecting. Instead, what we got is a Xiaomi 17 series, unifying the lineup with Apple's 17 series. So you get the 17, the 17 Pro, and this, the 17 Pro Max. I think Xiaomi should just completely embrace the Apple in China tag and move on now. Anyway, a lot has been said about the Xiaomi 17 Pro Max on the internet, so I'm not going to talk about the display on the rear, the cameras, the battery, all of that. I'll do that for when the product actually launches in India, or if it launches in India. Instead, I'm going to have a singular focus on performance testing the Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 5, considering the fact that the 17 Pro Max is the first one to come with it. I'm talking about Xiaomi's 17 Pro Max and not this one. Talking about which, I'm also going to be comparing the 8 Elite Gen 5's performance to the A19 Pro inside this 17 Pro Max. Oh my God, it's going to be a tough task trying to identify which 17 Pro Max I'm going to talk about. Oh yes, and for the very first time, I'm going to let you into a secret of how we actually get average FPS data on Android phones and iPhones, and there is a very fun app called MoFtalk that I want to talk about. But yeah, stay with me. There are some interesting insights to find out. Alright, let's begin the video. If you're watching me for the first time, I'm Ashad. This is Track and Take English, your destination for detailed, incisive, catched reviews. Alright, let's get the synthetic benchmarks out of the way first, because we noticed some interesting things here. Because in Antutu, the score we achieved with the 17 Pro Max is nowhere near what we got with the Qualcomm reference design phone. Now, while the 3.3 million score is still much higher than what we achieved with the Snapdragon 8 Elite last year, I expected it to be at least somewhere in the 3.6 to 3.7 million range, if not the 4 million range, because the Qualcomm reference design actually had 24 GB of RAM, and this one comes with 12 GB or 16 GB of LPDDR5X RAM, depending on which model you pick. Which is why I feel like we should wait for the Antutu scores that phones like the iQOO 15 or the OnePlus 15 or even the Samsung Galaxy S26 Ultra with the Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 5 for Galaxy, the scores that we will get from those phones will definitely be higher than the 17 Pro Max. And after running Antutu immediately, I got a sense that no, I don't think Xiaomi is tuning this for, raw performance per se, because even the CPU throttle, actually the CPU stability wasn't that great in the CPU throttle test that we ran. So we engaged 40 threads for 30 minutes in all of our tests, and we got a CPU stability score of only 60%. And now the first comparison benchmark that we ran on both these phones is of course Geekbench. So the iPhone 17 Pro Max blew past the Xiaomi 17 Pro Max in single core performance, scoring 3924 points versus Xiaomi's 3505. But if you look at it, the multi-core score is slightly higher on Xiaomi, about 600 points more than what Apple achieved. Having said that, we can chalk this down to margin of error between the Apple and Xiaomi phone, but more importantly, the QRD phone that we tested at Qualcomm Snapdragon Summit actually had a higher multi-core score of nearly 12,000 points. This is not even doing 11,000 points, so there's something off here. Then we ran the 3D Mark Wildlife Extreme stress test on both these phones. So if you look at it, the iPhone held strong with 62.2% stability. It barely got warm and posted a 10% battery drop. However, Xiaomi went up by 19 degrees Celsius, which is hotter than I'd like, with 68.4% stability. But here's the interesting bit. It only lost 6% battery. Having said that, if you take a look at the best loop score, it's definitely much higher than Apple's. Now, this is an indication that the 8 Elite Gen 5's GPU is more powerful than the A19 Pro's GPU. And that is possibly the reason why, Xiaomi has to tame the GPU to ensure that the phone doesn't get too hot, because even in this test, it reached about 45 degrees Celsius. And here's another proof of the fact that the 8 Elite Gen 5's GPU is more powerful than the A19 Pro's, and that is the Solar Bay test that we ran. Of course, the difference between the average FPS on Xiaomi and Apple is not too much, but if you notice at the highest FPS that Xiaomi achieved, it crosses 55 FPS, which means that if there are games with ray tracing, then Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 5 will definitely perform better. But that's a big if, because games with ray tracing on phones, that's a mirage, not Assassin's Creed Mirage. Also, one very, very interesting thing that we noticed with the Xiaomi 17 Pro Max is the UFS 4.1 storage is so damn fast. I think we got the highest read-write speeds that we've ever achieved on a smartphone yet. The numbers are there for you to see on your screen right now. Now, next up, I'm going to be talking about some real-world gaming tests that we ran on both these phones, which is something that a lot of people have not done yet, so I'm really excited to talk about that. But yes, all this excitement and no subscription makes Ashad really sad. Go ahead, hit that subscribe button. Alright, to talk about gaming, we picked out two games this time around. It's Wuthering Waves and Genshin Impact. Both are pretty graphically intensive games and definitely better than testing out BGMI, I must say that. Anyway, first we ran Wuthering Waves for about 30 minutes on both the phones. Generally, when we get the average FPS numbers on Android phones, we use an app called Scene. We'll link that in the description, go check it out. It's a bit of a process to actually get it to run, so you'll have to look at certain resources to figure out how to run it. So we actually use Scene with the Xiaomi 17 Pro Max as well this time around. But Scene doesn't exist on iPhone, so the best alternative is PerfDog. And honestly, this is the first time we were using PerfDog with an iPhone, and it is so good with the kind of data that you get. This is no wonder considering that big gaming companies like Tencent actually use PerfDog for testing their phones. In fact, OnePlus uses it. A lot of other brands also use it. So very good tool. Also, I must say very expensive. Now, before I talk about the data that we got with Wuthering Waves, I must mention one thing very clearly is that immediately Xiaomi with the 8 Elite Gen 5 has an advantage with Wuthering Waves, primarily because you actually get the ultra high preset with Android phones, which is only high on iPhones. Surprising, because generally iPhone gets the higher graphic preset or higher FPS preset, but this time around it's Android. I'm so glad that is happening. Also, more importantly, cutscenes actually run at 60 FPS on Xiaomi, whereas it runs at 30 FPS on iPhone, which is why our data has a bit of a problem. But regardless, this is what we got. I'll talk about the numbers now. So the average FPS that we got in Wuthering Waves with the iPhone was about 52.4 and Xiaomi hit 57.9. But remember that the cutscenes actually tanked the average. You can see that when the cutscenes hit, the iPhone dropped to 30 FPS and then bounced back to 60. Now that's about the average FPS. In general, also what we felt is that Xiaomi actually ran the game smoother compared to iPhone. On the other hand, though, iPhone has an advantage is that yes, it does feel hot to the touch, but it dissipates the heat far faster than Xiaomi does, because Xiaomi actually continues to stay hot for a bit. Regardless of that, I like the fact that Xiaomi's peak temperature was only about 42 degrees and it didn't even cross the threshold that we have of 45 degrees. So I don't see any heating problems with the Xiaomi 17 Pro Max as such that a lot of people are noticing, at least in real world gaming tests. Now in Genshin, Xiaomi again has a little bit of a lead, slight lead nonetheless. It's about 59.9 average FPS that we got with Xiaomi, and 59.4 is what we got with the iPhone. So both of them are kissing that 60 FPS cap. And by the way, for this test, we specifically used PerfDog on both the phones. And this is where things get spicy, because PerfDog gives you a lot more information which tells you how the game actually felt to play. Now, jank is one metric that measures frame delivery hiccups per 10 minutes, like when your character freezes mid-dodge. In Genshin, Xiaomi logged 2.6 janks, iPhone did 3.3 janks. That's a small enough difference, so both offer fairly smooth gameplay as far as janks are concerned. Then there's the stutter percentage, tracking frames that take way longer to render. Mini freezes, basically. In Genshin, both hit 0.1%, dead even, impressive for both. Now, 1% low FPS is something that most gamers care about a lot, even the PC gaming community. And this is where you can see the worst case performance during intense moments like boss fights or crazy particle effects. Now, in Genshin, Xiaomi dropped to 41.3 FPS and iPhone to 30.2 FPS. Clearly, Xiaomi is doing a better job here, and that's something that I didn't expect at all. And finally, FPS drops per hour tells you how many times frame rate dips noticeably. In Genshin, Xiaomi had 7.9 drops, iPhone had a whopping 27.8 now. This is a huge gap. Now, if you've taken a look at all the benchmarks that we've run, if the CPU performance on both the phones are almost nearly identical, but the GPU with the Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 5 is far more performant than the GPU that you get with the A19 Pro. And ironically, that actually pisses me off even more, primarily because despite all of that headroom being available, you do not have AAA titles, running natively for Android phones or Android flagship phones, to be more specific. I really hope this year brands like Samsung, Vivo, OnePlus, iQOO, all of these guys at least push some manufacturers like Ubisoft to port their games to or their high-end AAA games to Android. We really want to play Assassin's Creed Mirage or Death Stranding on the Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 5, and of course that would also make it easier for us to do even more intensive benchmarks. Having said that, Xiaomi's tuning of the 8 Elite Gen 5 is conservative to say the least, because I expected the 8 Elite Gen 5 to be far more performant, which is definitely going to happen with the future 8 Elite Gen 5 phones that will launch. Like I mentioned, OnePlus 15, iQOO 15, all of those phones. Alright, so after all of this testing, what's the one takeaway about the performance tuning of the 8 Elite Gen 5 inside the Xiaomi 17 Pro Max? It's very plain and simple. Xiaomi wanted to be the first in the world with the 8 Elite Gen 5, so performance tuning was not their goal. Their goal was to ape Apple. Duh. Jokes apart, despite that, this video has given you a clear idea of what the 8 Elite Gen 5's headroom is in terms of performance. Now, the moment we get a more powerful phone, we will, update this performance analysis. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video as much as we love making it for you. All right, I'll see you guys in the next video. Until then, keep tracking and stay safe.